we like to bring people on like yourself that can give us some historical context of Juneteenth. Now, Juneteenth, we do understand that in June, I think June 17th, 2021, President Biden made it a federal holiday. I know a lot of us was like, okay, thank you, but did you
Right.
ask us?
Right.
Did you ask us what we wanted? Like, this ain't
Right.
really what we wanted, but okay. So I really feel like we have to take advantage. How can we better utilize this day, not just as a day off, but a way to storytell? So for those who are listening, because growing up on the East Coast in North Carolina, I had really never heard about or understood what Juneteenth was until I moved to Texas. It's very big in Texas. There's parades and
Hmm.
all the things that you see in Texas, but there's a disconnect from the rest of the world as it relates to Juneteenth. So a lot of people got this federal holiday and was like, what now? What? But I think we know more about it now. From 2020, most people are learning more about it. But I want you to give us a brief synopsis for those who are listening that don't really understand what Juneteenth is and the importance of it.
Sure. So I think the easiest way, the clearest and simplest explanation of Juneteenth is that it's the day that celebrates the official end of slavery as we knew it at the time on June 19th, 1865. It's the day when Major General Gordon Granger arrived in a place called Galveston, Texas,
Mm-hmm.
to share that the Confederate soldiers had surrendered, that the war was over, and all enslaved people were free. That's the top line sentence of Juneteenth, right? If we were to dig into a little bit more of the context, we'd understand that there's actually there's a lot more to this story. This it's not a simple easy thing. We celebrate Juneteenth today because it was the last place that received that news that we knew of at the time. But now we have the privilege of looking back in the oral histories that you've mentioned, research that we found, that where we learned that some people did not learn that they were free from enslavement in rural pockets
Yeah.
throughout the South. They didn't learn
Mm-hmm.
for decades. Can you imagine?
Mm-hmm.
Decades after emancipation, the war's
Yeah.
been over.
Yeah.
Black people are, supposed to be free, but some slave owner, some communities
Mm-hmm.
were tight-lipped about your freedom and kept you in bondage for decades later. Okay, that's a different story for a different day.
Yeah.
We might need
Yeah.
to actually talk
But
about that.
that's a real thing.
It's real. It's an
Yeah.
important thing.
Up
And
into the 1900s for some places.
that's
Yeah.
exactly right. It's
Yeah.
very, very important that we call that out and when we talk
Mm-hmm.
about Juneteenth. But the day is a day of celebration that, as far as the people knew at the time, they did not know that there were these pockets, these places where folks were still being held in bondage, being sold a lie. And so it's a day of profound solidarity and
Mm-hmm.
celebration for emancipation. And the reason why I say solidarity is because there are a number of emancipation days. In Virginia, it's April 3rd is the day when enslaved people there were set free, were
Mm-hmm.
emancipated. In Florida, it's May 20th. In Georgia, it's
Mm-hmm.
May 29th. But we celebrate Juneteenth because that date commemorates the last day. It's the day when the last group of people, and there's some
Mm-hmm.
practical kind of things happening here, right? Like, Robert E. Lee and the Confederates, they surrendered in the North at Appomattox in Virginia,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that news, we didn't have email and text message. So that news had to trickle down through the South to get really, really far down to like one of the furthest South points in Texas, which is the
Yeah.
island of Galveston. So
Yeah.
that's Juneteenth. It's I think the proper word is portmanteau. It's the bringing together of the words June and 19th. And that's the explanation.
Yeah. So Robert E. Lee, he surrendered
Yeah.
in Virginia after they lost.
That's correct.
After
They
they
lost.
lost. Yeah,
They
they
lost.
lost.
And the interesting thing is like everyone knew they lost. If we
Yeah.
can give a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
context, the reason why Abraham Lincoln was assassinated was because folks had started surrendering.
Mm-hmm.
The Confederates, those who were Confederate, members of the Confederate Army or the Confederate States, or at least sympathizers, they saw the writing on the wall. It was over.
Mhm.
They've been defeated. The country was moving on and coming back. The Union was going to be reunited.
Mhm.
And so it's only decades after the war was over when there is a real understanding that the Confederate States of America lost the war, that we see the daughters of the Confederacy pop up with what we would identify as a revisionist history,
Yeah.
changing that history in order to honor their fathers and their uncles and their brothers who'd fought in the war. They wanted to kind of redeem them, and so there is this narrative of the lost cause that
Yeah.
pops up, which I think is actually very relevant to Juneteenth.
Yeah.
In the years after the emancipation of Black people in this country, there's this thing that happened called the scatter. And the
Mhm.
scatter is the time when formerly enslaved Black people all over the country started just going everywhere to find their loved ones. I heard
Right.
that my sister was sold off in Georgia, but I'm in
Yeah.
Texas, and I heard that my best friend in the world was in Tennessee, but I was in Alabama. So they're
Mhm.
going to find the people that they
Their
love.
loved ones. Yeah.
And I love this detail because I think often when we talk about slavery in this country, we're we don't do enough work to humanize the people
Mhm.
who had been enslaved. These were folks with deep, abiding relationships, just like you and me,
Mhm.
who
Mhm.
didn't get along with some folks, loved some folks, had family members, had
Mhm.
friends. Right? We got to really do the work of humanizing,
Mhm.
the enslaved, the formerly enslaved people. And so it's very important to know that this scatter happens.
Yes.
And in the years after emancipation, Black people in America saw a profound amount of success
Mhm.
during what a period called Reconstruction. And during that period, Juneteenth celebrations were all the rage. They were like, hey, we are really out here enjoying ourselves, celebrating, eating red foods and watermelon and strawberries, and having a phenomenal time. There were recitations of the Emancipation
Mhm.
Proclamation. There were parades and rodeos and baseball games and songs and joy and freedom. It was a beautiful, beautiful time, precisely because the Union Army was occupying the South and ensuring the protection to a certain
Mhm.
degree of Black people's rights to gather, right to
Mhm.
celebrate, right to vote. And so
Mhm.
we see Black people elected to Congress and Black governor and lieutenant governors. And we see all kinds of incredible progress in the years, in the decade immediately following emancipation. But this group, the Daughters of the Confederacy, and others who are kind of a part of that legacy, began to uh, advocate for the removal of the Union Army. And that's when we see Black codes reinstated, which limited the freedoms and the movement and the gathering ability of Black people, laws that made it
Mhm.
essentially illegal to be Black.
Yeah.
And those laws completely stymied the
Yeah.
progress and the celebration of Juneteenth. We saw
Mm.
Juneteenth as a celebration begin to kind of die out for a time,
Yeah.
and become much more of a private celebration that you would see maybe in church and in Black communities like
Yeah.
Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or in small Black enclaves in
Mhm.
Texas and across the South. But you didn't see the large parades that we saw in the years immediately following emancipation. And that's another really, really important part of this holiday.
Yeah, yeah, it was silence, and it was replaced with, racial terror, in the South after the, Hayes Compromise, and so it just shows you guys, like, elections are so important, because they impact people,